First of all, I'd like to call your mind back to about 33, 34 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. The Persian Empire has been dominated by the tribe called the Medes. Medes and the Persians used to take turns ruling the empire. And the Medes have swept across almost all of Asia Minor, the Near East, swept down through Syria and Lebanon. They're pushing hard upon the city of Jerusalem. And out in the wilderness of the terrible desert, so called because it's so hot in the middle of the day that the stones crack open from the heat with a loud bang, there's a large butte, a hill, flat on top, surrounded by very sharp cliffs. It's called Masada. And there's the fortress at the top of it. In the last resistance against the Median army, a group of Idumeans from the tribe of Idumea have taken their last refuge there. A large family of followers of a young warrior. In the middle of the night, the young warrior, seeing that his family, the whole country, is in desperate situation, takes a small group of trusted soldiers, trusted warriors, and they ride out across the wilderness of the terrible desert in the dark of the night, reaching the Gaza Strip by morning, galloping their horses until they have to rest and to keep them from dropping dead, heading as fast as they can toward Egypt. Finally, reaching the border of Egypt, they come to a small port where they're taken by ship to the great city of Alexandria, where Queen Cleopatra is ruling, and Mark Antony is the governor responsible to the Roman government, the liaison with the Roman government. He's also the lover and live-in paramour of Cleopatra. The young man has known Mark Antony for some time because they fought together in Syria, so they're old army mates, close friends. And the young man presents his problem before Antony and Cleopatra. His family's trapped in Masada. His best friends, all those who fought with him, the last remnants of the Idumean and Judean army trapped in Masada, about to be overwhelmed by the Median army. The whole of the Middle East will be taken over, and the Romans will be driven out completely. Cleopatra is very interested because if the Medians conquer that part of Judea, Idumea, and march on Egypt next. So she's only too happy to provide a ship for the young warrior and the small retinue of his soldiers. Mark Antony, who's known him well for many years, writes a glowing letter to Caesar Augustus in his behalf. They set sail in the winter months when it's very dangerous to sail on the Mediterranean Sea. That wind called Heraclidum, which Apostle Paul would be shipwrecked by later, was blowing full force. But there's no time to waste, so the young warrior sails with his retinue, arrives at the port of Neapolis or Naples, and rides post-haste into Rome, presents his petition to Caesar Augustus. And Caesar gives him an army and makes him a commander and promises him that if he defeats the Medians, he'll be made king of Judea. The young man's name, of course, is Herod. Herod then takes his soldiers back through Macedonia. They come back down through what's today called the Lebanon, and they're successful in driving back the Medians and securing this whole area for the Romans, whereupon Caesar Augustus sends a specially made crown to Herod the Great, and crowns him king of Judea. That whole area from Lebanon down through Gaza or Gaza and into Idumea become his kingdom. Herod becomes famous for the great wealth that he brings to the area. He's a brilliant manager, brilliant ruler, exceedingly cruel, and a great builder. He builds a great stadium just outside Jerusalem, horrifies the Jews by having Greek wrestlers wrestle without clothing on and everything, and have horse races within the very where the sound would carry all the way up to the Temple Mount, where there is no temple. And Herod, sort of moved by guilt perhaps, then builds a great and glorious and beautiful temple on the top of the Temple Mount, and near it he builds a fortress called the Antonia, named for his good friend and mentor Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony. This is Herod the Great. Herod the Great builds a very strong kingdom. And then a little later, Caesar decides to annex Egypt. And Cleopatra and Mark Antony take a great exception to this, decide to declare war on Caesar Augustus with the intent of having Mark Antony made Caesar. So the Egyptian navy asks for the help of Herod, and Herod is a close friend of Mark Antony. So Herod sends a large contingent and a certain sum of money for this enterprise. Of course, Caesar Augustus defeats the Egyptian navy off the coast of Greece in what becomes Nicopolis, the city of victory, and the Egyptians are totally defeated. Mark Antony, Cleopatra go back to Alexandria. Mark Antony kills himself with his sword as a warrior, and Cleopatra allows a poisonous serpent to bite her and commits suicide, and Egypt is annexed. Augustus Caesar then sails to the east, lands on Crete. And Herod, knowing he's in great danger because he stood with Mark Antony against Caesar, sails quickly to Crete, goes into Caesar's audience chamber, and kneels down on his knees, takes his crown off and sets it at Caesar's feet and says, "I receive the crown at your hands and I return it to your feet. And I ask you, when you judge me, do not remember whose friend I was, but how good a friend I was to them." And Caesar replies, "If you'll be as good a friend to me, I'll return the crown." So he picks the crown up, puts it back on Herod the Great's head, and sends him back to Judea to govern the country. Sometime later, Herod is very assiduous about keeping the Jewish law. He keeps the dietary laws very carefully. And all the times he's been to Rome, he's always declined to eat pork. And he's well known in Rome for declining to eat pork, because this was a big thing in Rome when they had a dinner. Well, Herod the Great, one of his sons becomes a little bit antagonistic toward him. Herod, being somewhat paranoid, decides to kill the boy, so he chops his head off. And then he arrests all of his sons and plans to kill all of his sons. And Caesar intercedes because he doesn't think it's really a nice thing to do. And he makes a remark to his secretary, a remark that's been recorded for us, "It would better to be one of Herod's pigs than one of his sons." Because the pig would be safer, you see. So Herod intercedes, and Caesar intercedes, and Archelaus, who would have been better off killed at the time, he was a wretched fellow, as it turns out. And the other sons are all spared, and we find out something about the character, Herod the Great. His sons actually haven't been plotting anything against him, but he's so jealous of his power and so suspicious of everybody, because he's really been quite a cruel and savage ruler, although, great in the military sense, not in the human sense, that he would have exterminated all of his sons. So it shouldn't be surprising to us a little later when he hears that another king has been born in Bethlehem, and he goes and exterminates all the children who might be a threat to his throne. When Herod dies, when he's approaching death, he sets aside a large sum of money and hires a large bevy of mourners, because he knows that everybody in the country is going to rejoice when he dies, and he wants somebody to mourn for him, so he decides to hire some to come and mourn for him. After he dies, they're afraid to mourn for him because they're afraid they'll get beaten if they do, so they take the money and go off and rejoice like everybody else. This is Herod the Great. We remember only a little about him. We remember about the Magi coming to see him. We remember that when he hears that the Messiah, the King, is born, he gets a little bit panic-stricken. And when we know a little more about his life, we're not at all surprised, because that's just the way Herod was. He held on to his power to the last gasping breath. It reminds us of the Russian Tsar Boris Godunov, who, as he was dying, said, "I'm still Tsar," and expired. Right to the end. And he died. And so this is Herod the Great. Now, when Christ was born in Bethlehem, there's some interesting facts that we don't very often pay much attention to. First of all, why would Mary have been living in a place called Nazareth in Galilee?